Welcome to the Devin Nunes podcast, breaking through the political noise, separating fact from fiction. From the San Joaquin Valley, the breadbasket of the solar system. Here is your host, Devin Nunes.
Welcome back to the Devin Nunes podcast with Thaddeus McCotter, former congressman, author, guitar player, and most importantly, the author of the music and on guitar for the music that you hear as we come into the podcast, and then the full song plays at the end of the podcast. But Thad, you write now for American Greatness, which has been a startup. It's been around for about 4 years now. You've been writing there a few years. You had a spectacular piece this week, and it was called The Racist Left Feels Entitled to Riot. So welcome back. Thanks for being here.
No, thanks for having me.
What makes you give us a rundown? Why do they feel entitled to riot?
Well, just take the concept of systemic racism. If you play this out, if America is systemically racist and all white people are racists, whether they admit it and know it or not, / implicit bias training, and if you believe you live in a systemically racist country, then how are you going to change anything unless you go out there, hit the streets, and riot? And you feel entitled to do it because in your mind, it's an act of self-defense against an inherently oppressive, racist, fascist regime. And no other change will otherwise be accomplished. If you listen to the rhetoric that comes out of these indoctrinated children, especially out of the white privileged class, their own words, not mine, you'll hear exactly what I'm talking about. They feel that it is that not only do they have an entitlement to riot, they believe they have an affirmative duty to do it, to lash out violently against the system. And then you have their abettors, not only in academia and the media and within the Democratic Party, that will tell them your violence is really speech and that silence is really violence. And you can just hear the continued perversions that lead to a movement like this, and the left trying to utilize their little Frankenstein monsters to try to advance their agenda. And unfortunately, it seems to have boomeranged on them, and now they're in full backpedaling mode. But the problem persists because you still have continued violence and disorder in the communities, especially in the inner cities, and especially within minority communities where they're wreaking all this damage, and who can afford it the least?
Yeah, it's a strange phenomenon where you have what appear to be white, educated young people that clearly must have grown up in fairly either middle class or upper middle class, that are then out in these communities, talking about this BLM movement, which is a Marxist movement. Yeah. And they're I don't know what racism they ever have seen in their lifetime. And as we talked about on Tuesday, you look at the success story, despite the economic hardship that Detroit has faced because of China and because of world trade, global trade, and all of those issues. But you talk about the success of African Americans within the suburbs of Detroit, which is exactly true. So where did they come up with this? I know the New York Times has been talking about this for a couple years, but what do you see the roots of young, wealthy, white, educated people running around with their heads cut off, and actually, where we had a Trump supporter get assassinated in Portland just a couple weeks ago? Where does this come from? That help our audience understand, because people people listen to my podcast, they're aware of all this is happening. They're not living in the dark like a lot of Americans unfortunately are, because they're listening to the mainstream media and being censored on social media. Help us understand, where do these people originate from?
Well, first, in Detroit, we've not seen these riots because a lot of us have the memory of 1967, which was horrific. I was young at the time, but it's our generation and generations behind mine, too, have understood that the riots in 1967 caused incredible damage to the city of Detroit. We're still trying to recover from, and we cannot have another round of them. So we've had peaceful protests in the city of Detroit. Mayor Duggan and Chief Craig have been incredible in trying to make sure that does not occur. So far, we've been very, very fortunate. But when you look at this, Devin, these people, I would not say educated, they've been indoctrinated. They've been indoctrinated with critical race theory, which was a Marxist propaganda tool to try to divide the races in the United States, because they believed the racial fault line was a good way to cause dissension amongst the Americans and pit them against each other to help the advancement of socialism within the United States and communism as well. So this is what they're getting in academia, because our taxpayer dollars are paying people to indoctrinate our children to hate America. That's really what's happening. And they're trying to do it ever more. They're trying to get their hands on kids even younger than college students. They're trying to go into the K-12 now with their 1619 project, which is opinion, which is not historical fact, and they're trying to teach it as historical fact. So when you add this up, all they're being bombarded with is the sense that America is a fundamentally racist, systemically racist country, a horrible country, and has to be fundamentally transformed. And voila, what is going to fundamentally transform it? Oh yeah, socialism and communism. Right? It's the two most oppressive, murderous ideologies in human history. No thanks.
And so, but Thad, this is a thing that I think a lot of us that follow this closely, that we're watching, none of this happens without money. Sure, the indoctrination has happened. We've known that for a long time. The schools have this systemic problem. Probably the larger the schools, the bigger the unions, the more problematic it is, because it's a top-down push to the kids. Universities clearly are this way with all this, diversity training. And I think you're exactly right. But, I grew up, being educated in college on this also, which, now I look back, it was a little bit peculiar because growing up here in the San Joaquin Valley, and you've been here many times, that, everybody here was an immigrant. Even if you were an Okie that came from the Dust Bowl, you were someone who came out from a different state. You spoke a different dialect. I mean, everybody grew up with more than one language in the household, for the last, and that goes back, to the turn of the century, the 19th, the early 1900s, in this area. And so I look back and wonder, why on earth was I being taught diversity training, when I went to a university? And I can only imagine how bad it's become since then. And clearly that's what you see, what's being put out there on the street. I mean, I just can't believe these people that are running around like apologizing for what? What did you or your family ever do to run around and pretend that sure, does racism still exist in this world and in this country? Sure, but racism is always going to exist, no matter what, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to divide on racial lines. It could divide on your occupation. I mean, we see that a lot where people in the San Joaquin Valley here in California, clearly are mistreated by politicians in Sacramento because the power bases are in LA and San Francisco. Part of the reason why you see this area burning up here, Thad, is because of what you could say is either a misunderstanding or a purposeful misunderstanding of what really makes the world go around. And we've let fuel burn up. Now we're burning up the skies. There's smoke everywhere around here. It's quite incredible. But just it's to my point that you're never going to get away from human nature. That's always going to be an issue. But this idea that the American people or that we're running around disparaging people of color is just asinine. And I will say that one of the bright spots here about the Trump administration and President Trump is, for the first time, he does seem to be not only breaking through to the African American community, but also with the Hispanic community in this country, for sure. And I always like to say, as you know, that Hispanic means it's a broad definition, but right. Cubans in Florida dramatically going to Trump now because of the craziness that Obama did, embracing the Castro regime and communism and Marxism. But I also think Mexican Americans are also seeing this now too, with this weird culture of embracing, all of this. Well, you're this color, so you're going to vote for us, right? When right. The Hispanic community has never done better in this country. So,
well, the irony is their identity politics is the ultimate expression of the collective. That if you're born a certain way, you must think a certain way, or you are a traitor to your group. And that is how the left is trying to balkanize the vote in the United States and force people, if you're not, like Biden said, if you don't vote for me, you ain't black, quote unquote. That is wrong. In the United States, I was raised to believe that every individual is unique. Every individual, as a Catholic, every individual is a child of God, created in his image. And ergo, you have liberty and equality under the law, and we have pluralism, whereby everybody brings something to the table. We all sort it out. We take the best, throw out the worst, and we all move together forward towards a more perfect union. The concept of diversity is a liberal political construct that is being indoctrinated not only through academia, it is being preached in the media, in corporate implicit bias training seminars. It is also being, until President Trump's executive order, was being used in the federal government with our taxpayer dollars. So in the end, what you have are people running a racket to promote liberal left-wing causes that are not that are antithetical to the concepts of liberty and equality under the law, and they need to be stopped and they need to be disregarded and tossed back into the ash bin of history. Because everywhere you look historically that identity politics has been practiced and preached, you wind up with the ethnic cleansing in Serbia, or you wind up with the genocide in Rwanda. It does not work, and it is dangerous.
Yeah, or you can even go one step further and look at what the Pol Pot regime did there, where that was actually people, everybody was the same there, but they actually went after and killed the educated people.
Right. There's always, they will find a reason to define their opposition as the other, as an enemy, on the basis of some arbitrary concept of identity. And they will then claim that their act to kill their opponents is an act of self-defense, which is exactly what I talked about in my article, because they believe that speech is violence against them, and that the left-wing rioters believe that their violence is self-defense. It's insane.
And this is a few years ago, we started hearing about this identity politics. And when I first heard that, I'm like, well, it's didn't quite you start hearing this, and then you suddenly realize, like, wow, this is exactly what they're doing. They're putting groups of people together to say, hey, you're this, you're that, you're this. We're here to help you. All these other people have been discriminating against you, so you have to vote for us, Democrats.
Devin, I mean, you've seen it. I mean, look, my children, my wife, they're Hispanic, right? So now, and you'll appreciate this, now the left is saying, oh, no, you're a white Hispanic. They're now trying to determine who's a real Hispanic and who's not, and who has to think a certain way. What could be more racist than saying a certain group of people must think a certain way? Yeah. Isn't that the very definition of racism? Right? And bigotry and stereotyping people? Every individual is unique. You don't know what's in another person's head until they tell you.
Yeah. Well, they're getting away with this because, of course, the media is, continuing to run these false narratives that they, and I think that's one of our challenges here, is reaching the group of people that are just now, Thad, starting to pay attention. And they're all, in Michigan especially, it's going to be those kind of independent voters, whether they're, in the African-American community, who are saying, wow, this is, we have a great African-American guy running at the top, he happens to be Republican, or, people that, well, I'm going to actually get, make sure that I get out and vote this time because, I want to make sure that Trump gets reelected. We want to have that economy of old. But it's just incredible, today. And you know this, when we were first elected back in that time period, Bernie Sanders was a socialist, and he was kind of he was like, it would be a joke. He'd be sitting by himself on the floor, and everybody would always kind of make a joke like, oh, there's the socialist wing, and he'd always, it'd be him and a handful of other people that would vote that way. And although the Democrat Party was very liberal, they really have embraced and ushered in this socialist movement, which the only way a socialist or communist movement works is by, pitting people against each other and controlling the propaganda arm. And I think that's another one of the keys here, that those independent people, how are they going to get their information? And that's one of the challenges I'm sure you're seeing now in Michigan, is how are they getting this information? Because a lot of people aren't going to read what you wrote in American Greatness, because if you go to Google it, you're never going to find it. You have to actually, you have to actually go to the website to find it.
Well, I think we're in the early stages. And another piece that I wrote, and obviously your podcast is an example of this, is the communications revolution has empowered human beings to extents undreamt. Okay, your home office is in the palm of your hand every time you hold your phone, right? Your podcast is an example of an elected official trying to reach constituents without a filter, which is beautiful, which is what it's transparent. You can't be more transparent than what you're trying to do now. When you look at it, everybody is getting more power over their own lives, more ability to control their own pursuit of happiness. What you're watching are governmental elites and bureaucracies using every means at their disposal to stop it, because they want to control you. They want to dictate your pursuit of happiness. They want to force you, to coerce you to believe in what they believe, which is them on top telling you what to do. And you're seeing this not only with the deep state in the United States, but you're seeing this in communist China and other authoritarian regimes across the globe. They're very scared of losing their power and influence, the quote unquote elites, if you will, the bureaucratic administrative state. But eventually they cannot stem the tide. And so we're going through a very difficult period of time now where you're going to continue to see every means at the disposal of the administrative state and the bureaucracies and the elites, the corporate elites and others, trying to get control over you and tell you what to do. But eventually they'll fail. People like to control their own fate. They like to control their own future. They like to make their own decisions. Now, a handful might not feel comfortable with that. A handful might feel a little empty without external validation. Well, that's their problem. But ultimately, freedom will succeed, but it's never been easy. Every advance of liberty has never been easy, and this one won't be easy either.
Well, it is incredible how we've allowed these tech oligarchies to become so big and so powerful, all run by left-wingers who, I'm not sure that they actually believe in socialism or communism, but they like having that position of power. And what a better place to be if you're Google that owns YouTube or Facebook and Instagram or Twitter, when you essentially, with all those, you have a monopoly over virtually everything and all the propaganda and all the messaging that gets out, to the American people. And one of the things that I think that we dropped the ball on because we just didn't know how bad it was going to become. We should have recognized it, but it was hard to understand at the time. Just how in bed these tech oligarchs are with the Democrats, and the Democrats will say, "Oh, you're really bad. We're going to tax you. We're going to break you up." They're not going to break them up. The only thing they're trying to do is ensure that they say and do exactly what they want with their so-called content moderators. And the question is as I've heard you say many times, and I say it also, how long does it take for the truth to get its boots on, so that those people that are on Facebook, that are on Twitter, don't realize, wow, if I'm reading this, I'm really getting propaganda, put directly to me.
Right. Well, when you think about it, we would support the tech industry, especially Facebook and Twitter and them, back when we believed that it was the Democrats wanted government to control the content. We thought that they were neutral platforms where they would just post stuff and let free speech run its course, which was beautiful. I'm a free speech zealot. So when that changed, it was the tech industry that decided they're going to change it and start to regulate it and start to suppress conservative speech. We're like, wait a minute. That's not what you're supposed to do. That's not what we were told you were going to do. We thought you were all about free speech. And once they got big enough to make that change, they decided to do it. And every now and then the Dems would pipe up just to make sure they stayed on the party line and continued to suppress conservative free speech. So over time, they're either going to have to get back to what they should have been, or they're going to have to be broken up as a monopoly, and as a dangerous one at that, by heavily regulating speech, because that was not their original goal. And I think that that's going to happen. Now, again, it's not going to be easy. It's going to take a lot of time. But I don't see why this should be the only monopoly the Democrats are more than happy to let run rampant. And in terms of their ideology, just like a lot of the corporations, a lot of the people who run these are so rich, they never think they'll see the consequences of their ideological imbecility come home to roost. They're mistaken.
Mm-hmm. Well, eventually they'll eat their own. And that's part of the problem here, that the left has not, they've created this monster so much so that, they're assassinating people, as we've discussed before. They're driving around these buses that clearly somebody's paying for. If you give to BLM, you're going through the Democrats' own fundraising website. So all of that data is being collected by the Democrats. But you're right, they've created a monster that they can't control. And I think you saw that just recently, Thad, with Nancy Pelosi, who you served with, and who all this time, it was pretty clear she was getting a haircut, she was coloring her hair was always in perfect shape. And now we find out, what was she doing when she was back in San Francisco? She was going into a salon that happened to be closed for all the normal people, and the salon owner is basically broke. And then eventually she said, look, I've had enough of this, and she released out to the public a picture of Pelosi not wearing a mask and going to a salon. It's just outrageous. But
it was outrageous. Yeah, it was outrageous how she got set up.
Yeah. And then makes up another lie to say she was set up, which of course the mainstream media has allowed her to say that, and I'm sure it won't be long before the social media companies will take down any post that says that this was clearly this was a criminal act against the Speaker of the House.
The woman who helped the Speaker of the House, who helped set up and run a scam impeachment on the President of the United States, is now claiming she was set up getting her hair done.
Well, Thaddeus,
she's a victim. Oh, yeah.
Thanks so much. I hope you come on again. Congratulations on all the great work you're doing in American greatness. And for those of you who all know, you're hopefully watching this on Rumble or listening to you on your favorite podcast, that you can follow at Thad McCotter on Parler, because that's the only thing we promote is Parler on this show. We don't talk about Twitter handles. But Thad, any last parting shots here before we let you go?
No, I'm glad you and Kevin and the people of the House are doing the best they can under trying circumstances. Hope you get a majority back for all the good things you can do to move America forward and keep America great. And so House members, you got Senate races, you've got the presidential race, but the House members are key, because the House members are the ones you go to when you need them most, and they're always the most available at all your federal elected officials. I'm still a House man, Devin.
Well, we're going to count on you in Michigan there as we begin to play the Thaddeus McCotter theme music to the Devin Nunes podcast. We're going to count on you to get John James across the line, and we have a couple seats there in Michigan that we can pick up, and maybe I'll see you out there in October, Thad. But thanks a lot for coming on this week. This is Devin Nunes. We'll catch you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Devin Nunes podcast. We invite you to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. And remember, you can download this podcast on iTunes or at devinnunes.com.
Storm clouds been gathering so long, I don't know.
The darkness around us leads no easy road.
We started wondering if every road dead ends our dreams. Wind whips the dust up and rain's pouring down.
Good people struggling in every hometown.
We've started wondering if we even matter at all. We'll take that hard road to happier days, 'cause we kept our American faith. Now it's not our first trial by fire like this.
It's nothing hard working family can fix.
We've got the power to save it all here in our hands. We'll take that hard road to happier days, 'cause we kept our American faith. As we, the people, free and strong, fight through the dark night toward the dawn. Freedom marches on. Now the hard road is waiting, but we're not afraid.
That's why they call her the home of the brave.
With a prayer and a purpose, we're already half the way there. We'll take that hard road to happier days, 'cause we kept our American faith. Ooh, we kept our American. We kept our American. Ooh, we kept our American. We kept our American faith. Freedom marches on.
Paid for by Devin Nunes Campaign Committee.